And we're back for another episode of Pursuing the Perfect Pint. It's episode 30. And quite concerningly, it seems like Brent doesn't know how to count because he says this is the same as his age. So happy birthday for your 30th birthday, Brent.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a disillusionment. Like, there's my real age and then there's the age that I think. So I still think I'm 30. So I
There
guess
you are.
I'm
I
going to
like
use
that.
this as an opportunity to as a milestone, go back more than a few years. But yeah,
I mean, Brent, you've been doing quite a lot of traveling around in the last few weeks, seeing how the crop is going. So before we get into this week's episode, which is really around, a really interesting discussion you had about regen ag in the UK, we have to do the usual story, which is what's happening in the market and your view on the weather in your dual role as weatherman.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point, Daniel. I guess, first of all, I do like to get out and see the crop. So I do organize a few little trips. We used to do tours, but anymore, I think it's easier in a way that I can get out and see things. So yes, the UK, the part of south of England that we saw did have some struggles, and now we've had a lot of heat since then, which has been the big topic the last couple of weeks. So
Yeah.
I guess we see heat concerns in the UK. France for sure with the high heat here. We're near the end of June,
Yeah.
and we've been in a really big hot spell. That's across Europe, so that has raised concerns a little bit. And you had a chance to be in France separately, and then you and I were up in Denmark, Sweden. So, I think if I summarized it for barley, I think the barley crop generally is far enough along that this big heat wave is going to have less impact on barley. It will have some, of course, but I think
Yeah.
we're mostly through. There will be some impacts from earlier, so yield will be below average in many cases, but it's far enough along that I think we'll get a reasonably okay outcome.
Hope.
The
Yeah.
the bigger concern probably is for the other crops that aren't as far along, like wheat and corn crops in Europe,
Yeah.
for example. These are things that will be impacted by the stress of the heat. Those prices will therefore be impacted to the upside. And I guess what normally happens then, barley will be pulled along the way
Yeah.
in that case. So there's a big weather element. So that's one of my two big topics from a market standpoint. The other is it hasn't fully, there isn't complete calmness in the Middle East, so we do still see some flare-ups. I know the Strait of Hormuz is open. I was just reading something,
Yeah.
maybe vessel traffic, which is highly tanker driven, so a lot of oil and LNG is reflowing, but it's only still at 50% of normal at best. And then we see a few little skirmishes pop up. So we're never too far away from another disruption, but generally prices for oil, for example, are coming down. That will be helpful for many, many economic reasons, but we're never too far away from that thing just flaring up and another impact. So I guess maybe, and we're heading into harvest, so maybe we're going to see a little more calmness. Prices will be at least constrained, I would say, because of the weight of harvest coming, but the impacts and so on will likely still keep things
I
rather
think just on some
well
of the
supported.
walkabout that you and I had, Brent, I think there's some conservativeness around yield expectations given the weather and everything that we've seen.
Yeah, I think just fairness and what fits in, and we talk a lot about regen ag, which is good. The very, very positive story is almost everyone, of course, we talk to talks about their crop is standing up better to these climate
Yeah.
extremes that we're seeing because of the new practices, or the I'd say not necessarily new, but the regen practices
Yeah.
is building more resiliency, and of course we need it when we get these hot spells. So I guess that's a positive, but there will be impact, to your point, Danielle. It won't be.
Yeah.
It's not going to be what we say. It's not going to be a bin buster. We're not going to
No.
see above average yields. In fact, we'll be struggling to get to average.
Yeah. And so, as we go into that, I think it's a great segue into that really interesting discussion you had in the south of England with Robert from Rooks Nest Estate, and his perspectives on regen ag and his engagement with it, and some of the end users. Let's take a listen.
Okay, the Pursuit of the Perfect Pint podcast is now back on the farm. So under the idea of no barley, no beer, we're back in the UK to meet with Robert. And we were here in 2024 with our tour. So thanks for welcoming us back. But I guess thanks again for hosting us 2 years ago. Time flies, but we're back Rooks Nest. Maybe you could start off an introduction of Rooks Nest and your role in the estate.
Yeah, thanks for coming back to visit us. A bit quieter than normal. Normally you bring 20, 30 people with us and we have a meal and a couple of beers and discuss everything going on. But yeah, so we're about 2,200 hectares. Cereals has been the backbone of the business. Wheats, barleys, grass seeds for amenity and resowing. What else are we growing? Peas, beans, linseeds, when we're feeling a bit silly, and oilseed rapes. So that has been the backbone of the estate business. But over the last few years, all the commercial side of it and leasing sheds and barns and commercial units have probably taken over because UK Ag's going through a pretty challenging period.
Yeah.
With its own internal policies, but as well just, commodities and then inputs are just killing us.
Yeah. That's a complete reversal of where it was before, where your agricultural element of the estate was driving the business, and now you've seen it flip over. The renting of properties and so on is now at the top, which seems backwards in an ag center focus. So you were mentioned earlier. Well, we went out and did a little bit of a drive about.
Yeah.
I guess the highlight or the low light is you're looking at moisture levels that are way below what you had last year.
Yeah. Within 5 mile radius, we looked at some malting barley, looked at a 200 hectare block, and all sown around 25th-ish of March, give or take 4 or 5 days. And that's had 20 mils total to date. So we're at the 28th of May today. Whereas we go, I think it was about 3 miles the other way to 190 hectare block. And that's had 44.5 mil of rain. And it's chalk and cheese. The crop was shorter.
Yeah.
It was stockier, had more tillers. It was lush green. Whereas the other stuff was taller and it had just given up and had a tiller max and it was all going to, going to it.
Yeah. So your expectations have been reduced for this year's crop as a result.
Yeah, we'd budget 6.75 with an expectation to hit 7 most years. And we would do that most years as an average. There'd be blocks where we 4 spring barley where we shouldn't. We do 5s, but then we have bigger stuff and better stuff to do 8s or a bit more. So will we hit our 6.75? I don't know on that block, considering there's 200 hectares there, which is just under 50% of the barley. If we do 5 ton on that block, I'll be pleasantly surprised considering what we've seen today.
See where it looks, yeah. So there's some challenges this year. I think some of the things you mentioned, which I think is really good for people to hear, is not changing that reality for today, but the spring malting barley is something that is favorable for you from a rotational standpoint. So it is core to your business. Yeah. Unfortunately, this year's going to underperform what you want, but it doesn't change your attitude towards spring malting barley.
No, I don't think so. When we weigh it up, if we're going to go for winter barley, which historically has been growing out and out for feed, for yield, the Syngenta high, hybrid varieties, we put quite a bit of income in against the straw. Malting barley has still always stood tall on a margin. So, and the time we can double stack with other kind of greening things, fruit, winter cover crops and things, and then that feeds into the malting barley. Yeah, I think malting barley is still here to stay, but it's just showing that a crop that we're very reliant on is becoming a bit more unreliable, which is not just down to the weather, but just the premiums haven't been there the last couple of years. We've had years where we were selling malting barley 10 years ago at £200 a ton. I know that was a good year, but so the range we're in the same range that we were 10 years ago. We are today, but with national insurance that's gone up, pension contributions gone up, all our other big costs, and and fertilizer and everything. So the margins are pretty tight.
Yeah. Haven't really gained anything in a decade, or from that standpoint.
Not really. We've been kind of growing 7-ton crops for a long time. Yeah. The only thing we're concentrating on more is probably cutting the end back to make sure that we do get that kind of nice sweet spot of 185N without risking putting too much on to push yield and quality. We're just accepting a lower yield but trying to push the quality.
Yeah. And malting barley gives you some other benefits. You mentioned that some weed control and you get lower cost overall. So there's some natural attributes to it which will keep you positive, I would guess. Forward.
And obviously over like 1,700 hectares of cereals, 400 plus hectares of malting barley. It's a good one within the rotation. And blackgrass is a big one for us. Brome's coming a bit, and there is resistant ryegrass around, but not in this area at the moment. So mixing, matching timings of chemistry and kind of also trying to trick the weeds and when they grow, and we can use more, Roundup pre-drilling and things. It's becoming quite important, and it spreads workload. We can't get everything drilled in one period, and also harvesting, harvest windows.
So you need that. You need that as part of the rotation. I guess having said all that, I guess when we will enter in another topic, which is can be a bit of a sensitive one, and we talked about it in prep for this. So I guess under the umbrella of regen agriculture, you've got a view in a sense. You've seen some, I would say, some positive developments. You see some canola, rapeseed, and some wheat where you're starting to get some clear messaging in terms of premium being paid and maybe the reporting requirements to come with it, and that seems to me fairly well established. And you're just starting to see it on the malting barley. So would you say malting barley is a little bit behind in that whole process of giving you a clear signal as to what is required and what you're going to get paid? How would you stack malting barley up versus those other crops that you're dealing with?
I think if you look at, we've had probably 4 or 5 years of these PepsiCo contracts for canola or oilseed rape, but you got to remember the oilseed rape is not going straight into direct human consumption in the same way malting barley would be. If when we've challenged them on malting barley regen, even at Christmas at a big annual conference, they was like, well, the youth for today or general public consumption are not willing to pay an extra 10, 20 pence or 30 pence for that privilege of being regenerative. They like the idea of it, but when it comes to putting their money behind it, they're not willing to do it. So I was very surprised to come February of this year, I had a call out the blue saying, would we be interested? And I said, well, what do we have to do? And we didn't have to do anything different to what we're doing. And that's what I've liked about whether it's the malting or the malting, the milling or the PepsiCo oil contracts, is that we haven't had to do anything else. We have to demonstrate we've still got mixed livestock. We've got integration. We're reducing our synthetics. We're direct drilling a bit. We're low disturbance. We've got livestock. All these kind of things we're already doing. So opposed to us saying, right, well, we now need to go and buy a direct drill, which is complete tail wagging the dog. So I think it is a good thing that
it is a reporting requirement. So you do have to spend some of your time to fill that, but it's not making you change your ag practices.
For instance, the rape one was, I think it was a check was about £12,000-15,000, and I'd probably put aside one day a year to have to do all this documenting. So it's a no-brainer in that sense. And if we can keep adding an extra 5-10 grand across different crops and add another £5-10 to each of these crops per ton, then great. It's all the little bits we've got to do, opposed to trying to find the big winner. Is trying to find loads of little ones that then contribute. Before you know it, you've had another 50 grand onto your bottom.
Yeah. So there is some positivity to that. You're starting to see not an onerous amount of reporting and not any changes to your practices. So those,
it's quite clunky.
Yeah.
Because it's not through common tools.
Yeah.
There isn't a singly accepted data entry platform.
Yep.
So you're having to use 2 or 3 different platforms to enter for each company. So it is quite clunky.
Yeah. I think it's a good word, clunky. The other one which you touched upon is you're looking at annual contracts. So take the malting barley example you've got. You may have some clarity on the contract for malting barley for this year, but it's just 1 year, which is, in my mind, would be quite difficult from a farm perspective, because regen ag and all the longer term investment in that is way beyond 1 year. But an annual contracting program is maybe a start, but I guess in your mind, you're going to need a more clear direction on a longer term basis before you could, do all the things you want to do. You talked about maybe there's some changes in the livestock that you run and how you run the operations. I think it would be quite difficult to do that if you're looking at annual contracts, not knowing what year 2 or year 3 looks like. Is that a fair summary?
I think going back, we haven't changed anything that we've done. We haven't reshaped the business for it. So at the moment, I just see it as a premium on top of a premium, on the malting barley. It's just a nice to have. If we get it, great, because there's nothing, as long as we now go through the process, we will get paid, so that we're not budgeting it. It's an extra. It's a nice to have at the moment. But we're already starting to see it with some of the older contracts of 5 years. Now they're saying they need to be 3-year contracts, or 5 years. Now they're looking at Vera accreditation. They're looking at whole farm models. So the end users are starting to look at a bit more long term. And I think the malting barley one is for Heineken, and it is a 2030 net zero target of theirs.
Yeah.
So they probably need to be starting to look for their sake as well as ours. They need to starting to be investing into us to help them achieve their goals.
And you saw it this year, I guess, in a way, but you didn't see it last year. So I guess that's progress, and from that standpoint.
And even at Christmas time, chatting at a conference, or not listening at a conference, they were saying, someone in the audience put the hand up and said, "Why won't you do it?" And he said, "Well, people won't pay for it, so it's not happening." And then a company have come out in January announcing it. So that's happened pretty quick.
Yeah.
Which will be more.
Yeah, which is good. But more is needed, and I guess that is where it leaves us. So you're positive towards regen. I guess to wrap up the whole regen story, you can see the benefits. It does seem to be a little more transactional still, not in terms of a longer term kind of strategic model, because you're not seeing it in the long term. So for you, you'd have to treat it as transactional, because that's what you're seeing.
It's transactional, kind of an offset, opposed to where I'd like it to go to, that you have a longer commitment to each other, and it's more what they call insetting. So it's more investment directly. It's more of a story to your business.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it gets quite interesting.
Yeah.
If you could have a big buyer of barley, for example, or maltster, or a small one that wanted to sell the story about the individual farms. So there's more provenance, there's more story. Because as you were saying, that people in the UK and probably around the world are starting to be prepared to go to the butcher or the little farm shop and pay a premium for grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
That is becoming quite apparent certainly in this part of the south of England, albeit a wealthier part of England.
Yeah.
We're definitely seeing it. So why can't that then be transpired into a can of beer?
Yeah. So we'll get there. It's a longer term journey. I think the storytelling, as you said, that's the reason why we do the podcast. And I think it's important to hear the farmer voice, because what it tells me that at a farm level, people are already doing things. So if you just want to know what it is, you're an open book from that standpoint. You need some direction coming down, say, from an end user brewer, like you mentioned, through the maltster. So we're not that far away from kind of linking this all together, and it could be quite a good story when it's all said and done. I envision there's still some bumps in the road, but I think I'm just pleased to hear what you mentioned today. Like there's some pieces starting to be put in place that you could build from and move this forward. So I'm an optimist by nature, but I guess I look at this as maybe it at least looks to me like it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think farmers have got to be optimistic, because otherwise we'd say, what do we do it all for? But we're quite aware that there's some bigger players in the market that are kind of controlling our inputs and our outputs. So we're quite aware of being stung, and we have been stung before. So while we're optimistic, we don't forget.
Yeah, I get a good.
So there's got to be something quite kind of long term, medium to long term, something that's kind of tangible and something that benefits both businesses.
Yeah. Well, we'll get there. I'm concerned. I think you're talking of 2030 type targets. What I get the sense is now people are starting to look at the calendar, and they're starting to do the calculation and realize that 2030 is not that far away from an agricultural standpoint, when you'll soon be planting 2027 crop.
Harvest 27.
So I think there's a bit more urgency coming into this, which might trigger some of that longer term view and more clear messaging beyond 1 year, which I think would be positive for the whole chain. So let's stay tuned for that. I guess maybe it's called the Pursuing the Perfect Pint podcast. We didn't have a chance to share a pint this time, but if we were going to share a pint, what's the perfect pint in your mind?
Depends on the weather.
Yeah.
If I'm out in Australia, I quite like the 3.5%, the mid-strength stuff, because I guess you drink to a climate, but you can't beat a good old hoppy pint in England.
Yeah.
Cold summers, cold winters.
Yeah.
Different climate. But then I'll throw a curveball. You can't beat a cider.
Yeah.
So it's probably
there's something for every different occasion in a sense. But well, Robert, thanks again for taking some time. It's good to catch up with you again.
Yeah.
We'll definitely be back if you'll have us, and look forward to catching up again. So till next time, cheers.
Come next year.
Brent, I think that was a really interesting conversation. I think such a pragmatic approach to regen ag and the benefits that it provides, and that the admin is not too intensive given the value that they get from that.
Yeah, and I guess, Robert, and I think people, when you listen to it, could see, we've had we've met Robert several times. He invited us when we had our tour. So it's also when you have some comfort with someone, you can talk and you actually get right into the subject of
Yeah.
what's important. Under the no barley, no beer heading, it fit very nicely. And you're exactly right, Danielle. The pragmatic piece is for especially for all farmers, but when you're a larger farmer like what Robert's doing with every day, you have to look at it from an agribusiness
Yeah.
perspective. And I know all farmers do, but there's a need to have some clarity on those, and now you can start to see, where I keep raising it is I think the idea of contracting annually is not the right long-term solution. I think we'll get there in time, but I guess when you hear feedback directly from people like Robert and Nick a couple weeks ago, then we start to see that farmers are really up for the challenge. They're doing it, happy to do the reporting. In return, they do need a little more clarity on something more than 1 year at a time.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is also interesting to hear how different end users, and not just from the malted barley supply chain, are coming to him looking for contracts as they head to trying to hit their 2030 targets. So that was also interesting to hear.
Yeah, and there'll be more of that coming up with some of the other visits that
Yeah.
we've made, and you've heard it from me, Danielle. It's quite important from a malt supply chain perspective that we don't get lost in all the things we're doing and forget that there's another world out there,
Yeah.
and wheat and oilseed crushing, and we went to Denmark, Sweden, and we know oats and other crops are grown. So you have to be careful that you're not losing sight of everything else
Yeah.
that's going on. The one positive is, from some of the people we've talked to recently, we actually may be, in some cases, ahead of those other industries, which is good. But my
Yeah.
point mainly is it's good to just take a step back and reflect, where are you in the journey and what are others doing? Don't let off the gas, as we say, but I guess it's important to keep that context.
Absolutely. And I think, Brent, we've got some more exciting conversations really focusing on this year's crop in the next few weeks as we move around.
Yep. So yeah, stay tuned for Denmark, Sweden, stories in and around that, a brewery visit, and we're still connecting with some people that are delivering great messages. A stop in Canada, a stop on people management and change. So all these things are upcoming. So a wide range of topics.
Stay tuned. See you next week, Brent.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yes.